What's going on, Rob? This is Guys, and we are back with DC K.O. And if you've never read anything about Impulse, Bart Allen, the grandson of the Flash, Barry Allen, and a descendant of Eobard Thawne, if you can believe that, if you've never read anything about him in DC Comics, you're going to learn about him here, and you are going to love him. So, here's the thing. This, much like the Superman comic, basically opens up right before the events of DC K.O., when everybody's kind of getting an explanation of what's going on. But unlike Superman, where it's all kind of dialogue and Superman asking questions about the nature of Darkseid and so on and so forth, that in fact this has an amazing moment where Darkseid humbles both Wally West and Impulse. So, here's the thing. This initially kicks off with Bart and Iray, also known as Iris, basically you can call her either one, but the daughter of Wally West, essentially getting ready to go on a joyride, right? And I will give you guys a crash course on Bart Allen here in a little bit. I'm not going to leave you guys hanging, but I felt this was cool because you'd get a good understanding of his character. Because the funny thing about this is Iray asks him, right, like, are you sure we should be going on a joyride like this? And Bart's just like, nope, I have no idea if we should do this at all, but I do know it sounds fun, and that's really the only thing that matters. Right? Because at that point, Iray is just like, and here I thought Jai was having all the fun back in Keystone City, right? Jai, of course, being the other child of Wally West. And then she just asks, right, like, aren't you supposed to ask for the keys before you borrow the car? And Bart's like, look, here's the thing. Number one, this is not a car. Right? Cars are slow and cars are boring. This is a JL657 Starjet, right? It's so fast that we'll be back before we're gone. And then she's like, do you even know how to fly this thing? And he was like, I have no idea how to even drive a car, let alone drive a spaceship. But what's the worst that can happen, right? Piloting an interstellar craft through the vacuum of space. What's the worst that could possibly happen here? But he says, number two, right? Wally's kept you so cooped up on the watchtower that I figured you deserved at least a little bit of fresh air. And of course, Iray's like, I mean, there's no air in space. And Bart's like, I mean, you get what I'm saying. But here's the thing, right? We've had enough gib-gab and enough talking, right? Let's put this thing to the test, right? Let's get these Speed Force afterburners going, and let's see what this thing can do, right? Full on Fast and the Furious. But you know what? Somebody didn't want the kids to be able to enjoy that joyride. So you know what they did? They shut down the car. They shut down the car, and it was Superman. You would think that if anybody out there would understand the need for kids to go on a joyride, it would be Superman. But being the party pooper that he is, he basically just tells them, look, right, like Impulse, Iray, not right now. Like, we have a Justice League meeting. And so at that point, you switch over to Max Mercury and Bart. Now, time for this little bit of a crash course, right? In all seriousness. So Bart Allen was really and truly introduced in the Flash Volume 2, issues 92 and 93. Technically, he does predate that as a cameo, but 92 and 93 is where you really get the origin of his character. And the long and short of Bart is that unlike Wally West or Barry Allen or even Max Mercury or Jay Garrick, who basically attained their powers through some kind of external means, which essentially allowed them to tap into the Speed Force, Bart Allen was born with the ability to tap into the Speed Force, and in fact, he couldn't turn it off. And so in Flash Volume 2, number 92, Iris approaches Wally and is like, my grandson's dying, right? Due to his inability to shut off his super speed. His body's aging at an accelerated rate, and within a week, he'll quite literally die of old age. And so what was going on at that point was that because his body was outpacing his mind, he was hooked up to basically a virtual reality simulation. The intention was to try to get him to a place where, number one, he would be comfortable and wouldn't realize that his body was dying of old age. But number two, the hope was that they could get his mind to catch up with his body. Ultimately, it didn't work. And so what ends up happening is that Bart Allen is brought back to the 21st century. And in fact, the first time he meets Wally, he attacks him. He immediately attacks Wally West. Now, a thing to understand here at the time that Mark Waid was writing these stories was that Mark Waid was elevating Wally and basically making him kind of like the foremost speedster, not really disrespecting the memory of Barry, but simply moving Wally in the direction of a person who would know more about the Speed Force than anybody else, potentially the fastest speedster to ever exist because he could mainline the Speed Force. And so the introduction of Bart kind of served to complement that, but also served the purpose of giving Wally his own kind of like Kid Flash to a degree. I don't know that I would specifically use that name, but the concept was still basically the same. And so what ends up happening is that Wally tries to take Bart under his ring. The issue with this is that because Bart lived his life in a virtual reality simulation, he has no true concept of danger, hence the codename impulse. He acts impulsively. And so as a result of that, Wally ended up handing Bart over to Max Mercury, the first person, at least in DC's historical continuity, to be able to tap into the Speed Force, and arguably the oldest of all the Flashes, or at least the Speedsters, if you want to call it that. Technically, I think he used the name Windrunner way back when, but the fact remains, right? Under the guidance of Max Mercury, Bart, with his powers essentially being reset by Wally so that his body wasn't burning itself out, and he was finally operating as just basically Kid Flash, that he learned what it meant to not be so impulsive, right? To have patience, different things like that. But at the end of the day, he is you or I. If we were a teenager and we got Flash powers, yeah, man, we would be impulsive as hell. And that's why fans love Bart Allen so much, especially when you consider his time on Young Justice. So, with that crash course out of the way, when Max Mercury pulls Bart to the side, he says, "You could have been halfway to Andromeda before you even considered whether or not that was a good idea." And of course, Bart's just kind of like, look, right, Ira needs to stretch her legs, Max, and I do too, to be honest with you. And that's where Max just kind of tells him, right, imparting these bits of wisdom to him. He says, "Bart, the fastest you will ever run in your life is when you're standing completely still." And I'm with Bart Allen on this one, because what Bart says is he's like, I can't tell if that's wise or just clever, right? And Max is just kind of like, I mean, go ahead, right? Shirk my advice all that you want to. And Bart's like, no, I mean, I really can't tell, right, if it's just wise or clever, because I don't even understand what that means, to be honest with you. And so the whole time that Max is talking to Bart, right, he's like, you can't tell because you simply don't have the experience to understand. Bart's not paying any attention to him. Instead, Bart is distracted by the meeting in the Watchtower with Time Trapper Doomsday and everyone else who's being informed of what's going on. And here's the funny thing. As soon as he sees Doomsday, he was like, nope, not a chance, not in my house, and he races off, and then Wally grabs him, and he's like, park it, kid, right? This is serious stuff. Existence-ending stuff. Why don't you just like try paying attention for once? And so that's where you kind of pick up with both the Justice League Omega special one-shot as well as DC K.O. #1, right? When everybody's kind of being told about what's going on here. And here's the kicker, right? This is not necessarily like the Superman comic where it's pretty much all dialogue with very little action. No. This has an amazing moment, right? Like where Darkseid humbles Impulse, right? I wasn't lying with that title. It's an amazing moment. So here's the thing, right? At that point, Doomsday just kind of addresses everybody, right? And he says, this is the history of our existence. We've explored every version of this timeline, and it all ends here with Darkseid. And so at that point, Wally's kind of listening to all of this, right? And he says, as Time Trapper and World Forger spoke of what was to come, what was already happening, and what could be done, if anything at all, we listened. The heart of Apocalypse had already been placed by Darkseid at the center of the Earth eons ago, a living essence thriving on Omega energy, answering only to the one who commands that dark power. The King Omega has the ability to rewrite our past, present, and future, reign over all that is. Our last-ditch effort would be a tournament, my best friends and allies duking it out, fighting dirty, perhaps to the death, all to see who might claim the King Omega title before Darkseid can. I could sense their fear, or maybe I was just feeling my own, but I could also feel the resolve in my cousin and daughter, the instinctual desire not to go down without a fight, no matter the odds. And so once this whole explanation is given to them, you basically pick up with only really a handful of the speedsters. Not all of them are here, but you have Jay Garrick, Max Mercury, Wally West, Ira, and Bart. And they're all just kind of asking the question. Right now, here's an important little tidbit here. It doesn't seem important, but it will become important later on. Because what happens is that Wally looks back on his own history. He says, for some reason, I remember the second grade, a bully named Travis Piper. My dad, Rudy, could be bad enough. But this kid, it felt like a foregone conclusion that Travis Piper would kill me someday. It was the exact cold terror that I felt now. That will become important here in a little while. And so kind of jumping back, right, to the speedsters, that Wally and Jay and Max, really the most level-headed of everybody who's here because the other two are kids, right? Wally just kind of says, like, I mean, I'll be honest, man, this whole tournament, it kind of feels insane and like desperate right? But Jay Garrick just sort of chimes in and he says, I mean, it could work, right? We fight Darkseid's way, we find a champion, we might have a shot at actually pulling this off. And of course, Wally's just kind of like, I mean, I don't really know how I feel about that. He says, I'm ready to fight, right? Ever since Wildcat was killed, I've been completely pissed off. And I say we beat the tar out of Darkseid until there's nothing left. Now, as a quick aside, yes, Ted Grant was killed in JSA number 6. He was actually killed by Lady Eve and the Injustice Society. It was a pretty significant moment. It was kind of nuts. She like stabbed him through the back with her sword. It was pretty wild. But again, right, Jay Garrick has just kind of been pissed off ever since. And even Wally chimes in and he says, even if we have to beat the tar out of each other first, is that really what we're looking at doing? But Max Mercury, right, potentially the wisest of all the speedsters, and certainly one of the most level-headed, just says, then perhaps the more measured approach that Time Trapper spoke of, restarting things in the past. Time Trapper and World Forger said that they were going to slow down time in order to give us a chance. Now, that was one of the things that they were kicking around, and we talked about that in the DC K.O. video. One of the things they were toying with was the idea of resetting the time stream, and nobody would remember their own past, right? It was quite literally a meta commentary on a reboot. Of course, the superhero seemingly shot all that down, and it's like, we're not going to restart our timeline again. It was kind of DC editorial telling us, hey guys, we know you're tired of reboots, we're not going to do it again. Right? But at that point, Wally's just like, but here's the thing, Max, right? More time travel, right? Like, we've already got displaced heroes from every era of history. Did you know Hop Harrigan's sleeping on the floor of Ted Kord's closet? And I never thought I would see a reference to Hop Harrigan. Okay, for those of you guys who don't know, Hop Harrigan is an old school character, right? All-American Comics #1 back in like 1939 or something like that. The dude's been around forever. More recently, he was in Brave and the Bold issues 1 through 3. Superman basically received a call for aid from Hop Harrigan. Superman shows up to find out that Hop Harrigan had never aged. It all turned out to be this great big huge scheme by this villain whose name that I can't pronounce. And essentially, Superman was saved by Hop, but then Hop like crashed into the ocean and then everybody forgot about him again. So it was DC teasing the character, right? But the fact is, this guy is like super old school and super obscure. But it's kind of funny here because Wally says, not to mention the time stream is literally on fire. Time Trapper showed me. I saw it. Darkseid is violently pulling it apart, remaking it in his own image. And so that's where the kids chime in. Now, kids jumping into this isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? I mean, kind of taking a page out of Marvel Comics, if there's any one thing that like the Fantastic Four's Future Foundation showed, is that kids can actually think outside of the box, and they can think about solutions in a way that adults simply can't, right? Divergent thinking, essentially. And so when Iray chimes in and says, if they're slowing down time, we'd be even faster, meaning us specifically. And even Bart says totally, right? With Darkseid basically trapped in molasses, right? We could take down Darkseid on our own in the past, no problem. Because if Time Trapper is slowing time down, then it means if they jump to that moment in the past when Darkseid first showed up in the Justice League Watchtower, Darkseid would be moving at an incredibly slow rate, which would give the Flash family every opportunity and all the time in the world to figure out how to destroy him and bring all this to an end. But Wally looks at this and he's like, no problem, right? Like that's, you really think it's going to be that easy? Or you really think it's going to be just go back in time and beat Darkseid, right? You think it's going to be that simple? And even Iray says, like, you're the one who's all anti-deathmatch. And Bart says, and remember, I grew up hooked into a 31st century virtual reality thing so that I wouldn't metabolize into a gooey blob of amino acids. And where Wally kind of chastises him a little bit, right? Bart just says, what I'm saying is this: I overrode the difficulty settings on every combat simulation. I maxed them out, man, past the safeguards. It could have killed me, and I still went undefeated. And so Iray just kind of compliments this, and she says his point is a slowed down Darkseid should be a cakewalk. Darkseid moving normally, yeah, he would absolutely destroy us, but a slowed down Darkseid, that's no measure of a challenge for anyone in the Flash family at all. And so after some banter back and forth, Wally's just kind of like, all right, look, right, I'm saying that this is not a game. It's not some virtual reality simulation. This requires adult solutions, Bart, real strategies, not the first idea that pops into your head. But as soon as Wally turns around, Bart's gone, man. He's disappeared, right? He just ran off with his own idea into the time stream. And he's like, yeah, man, we're going to go back and we're going to destroy Darkseid. It's the most impulse thing that could be done. And so that's why Wally says, within a picosecond, Bart vibrated through the reinforced bulkhead of the watchtower into open space, which could have killed him right there. Luckily, he entered the time stream before freezing or asphyxiating to death. He says, I, on the other hand, suffer a moment's hesitation, a lack of focus. And because of that, he's literally thrown out of the time stream. And so he just kind of says, okay, like I've got to get to Bart before he goes and does something stupid, or at least stupider than he already did. The kicker about this is that Max Mercury doesn't know who Bart is, and Ray has never heard of Bart. And so at that point, Wally's like, oh my God, right? He was like, then I know, right? He's already disrupted time. Who knows how badly? Enough to erase himself that he could already be dead or nothing at all. And so Wally jumps back into the time stream again, this time hyper-focused. And here's the cool thing, right? Because of the fact that DC K.O. is this great big huge crossover event between the main DC universe and the Absolute universe, DC's using this as a way to introduce people to characters that they've never really heard of before. Hence that little bit of an exposition from Bart about breaking the simulation restraints and all that kind of stuff. And even Wally does that here. He says the time stream is coming apart all around me, infected by Omega energy. And the Speed Force, it's crying out like it's in pain, under attack. I catch glimpses of my past, how I idolized the Flash, how I became the Flash, how my whole goal in life was always to become someone else. But was there ever another option? And then he says, I'm lost. I'm going too fast. I'm totally out of control. I cannot catch Bart, and I'm going to lose him. I'm going to lose everything. So it's a one-page splash that's just like a quick shotgun origin of Wally West. But then Wally finally locates Bart and says, there he is. And when he shows up, he finds Bart in the watchtower when Darkseid first appeared, basically trying to enact his plan. And so the two of them are just sitting there looking at the entire situation where everyone is effectively frozen in time. And Wally just kind of says Darkseid, right? Like we've traveled back in time. This is just before he was destroyed and then used his own destruction to create the Absolute universe. And so Bart, in looking at all of this, just says it's like ripples in a pond or something, right? Slowest in the most recent path. This moment has all but completely stopped. To us, microseconds take more than an hour to pass. And so he just says, right, no one can see us. We're moving faster than the speed of light. At this instance, we can trounce Darkseid, right? We can save everybody, everything, and it'll be like we were never even here. And he says, dude, this is our shot. And so Bart does exactly that. He goes in for the attack against Darkseid. It's a chance to save everything, right? Wrong. Darkseid clocks this guy, and he's just like, I am everything. I am my past, present, future. I am all. Did you really think that you could just go back in time and defeat me? My guy. Are you serious right now? Dude, it's amazing because Bart has no clue what hit him. Like Darkseid is moving at regular speed. And that's where Wally is watching everything and is like, Darkseid was waiting for us, right? Specifically for Bart and me. He knew that we were coming. He's somehow always known. And he's faster than we are. And literally Darkseid says, even your Speed Force will soon be mine. And Wally, in watching all of this, just says, I've watched friends be beaten to death in front of me, but never family. So he jumps in and he attacks Darkseid and does what he can. And Darkseid subdues this guy immediately. And he just says, let me show you something, right? Let me help you understand your place in the bigger picture. And let me remind you why I am the living embodiment of entropy and that only a fool would try to bring me to an end. So he just says, let me show you what I am. Feel me reach into your past and into your future. And so literally he jumps back into their own histories, manipulating their own lives, right? And they both say, then something weird happens, right? And Bart says, I'm back in the 31st century, hooked up to my VR system. And Wally says, I'm back in second grade, and Travis Piper is kicking the living crap out of me. And they both just say, something is wrong. Because in these moments, these glimpses, right, that Wally says, this is new. I do not remember Travis throwing me through a playground structure. future. And even Bart says, I hacked the difficulty levels of my combat sims, but I don't remember it hurting this much. And Wally says, when I see Travis's eyes, I know who he really is. And Bart says, then I remember who I'm actually fighting. And Darkseid, in forcing them to see all of this, reveals what's going on. He says, I can destroy you when and where I please, at any moment. Do you see? I am inevitable. Finally, right? Literally, he's Gene Hackman from The Quick and the Dead. If you live to see the dawn, it's because I allow it. Dude, it is amazing. It is so dope. This is why I love DC K.O, son. And we're not even at the main tournament yet. We're not even at the main battles yet, right? This is all just prologue, right? This is just prelude to the main conflict. And so at that point, we jump back to Bart's whole experience in the VR simulator. And he says, I remember the shutdown codes from my virtual incubation system. Turning it off could kill me, but it looks like that's going to happen anyway. And so he just tells Wally, right? Like, we have to get out of here. If we stay, we die. And so Wally just says, I'm running away. I don't even know where I'm going. He says, deeper into the past, into time, even as it burns up, Omega eating it alive. The Speed Force, it's sick, hurting, but maybe there's another chance to stop Darkseid, maybe somewhere in the past. But then Bart Allen just reemerges in Russia on June 30th, 1908 at 7:17 a.m. And he just starts looking around and he's like, where the hell is Wally? Like, he's just calling for Wally. He can't find Wally anywhere. And then Max Mercury just comes bolting right past him, right? And he just says, out of my way, boy. And at that point, Bart's just like, Max, like, what's going on, right? I'm trying to find Wally. I don't know where Wally is. I don't even know where I am. And Max just says, that Omega Blast was the largest concentration of his energy that I've ever encountered. He holds the truth, and he will bestow it upon me. At long last, my destiny awaits. And he says, emissaries, prophets from the future, reveal to me pure speed. Long have I sojourned. To him and his mighty cadre, I have pledged my total allegiance. And so once Bart catches up to where Max is running to, Max just bows down. And that's when you realize the absolute legion of superheroes is here. Their multiversal conquest is continuing. It's not just now in the main present day where Superboy Prime is being attacked by the absolute legion. They're also infecting history because now the past has been changed. Because at that point, Saturn Girl just kind of says, right, the one they call Impulse, our master was dismayed by your sudden retreat. And it's like, but here you are, ripe for the kill. And Max just says, all hail his word, his judgment, all hail the Legion of Darkseid. Darkseid is rewriting time. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.